Breaking news this Wednesday night, the Prime Minister ends the use of the Emergencies Act.
The situation is no longer an emergency.
Why it's being revoked and the reaction. Ukraine's urgent plea to the world.
No one will be able to sit out this crisis.
The intensifying warnings Russia is inching towards an all-out invasion and the anxiety among Ukrainian Canadians. Questions about reinfections. What's the risk of catching Omicron multiple times? And food fight. Why Frito-Lay has a chip on its shoulder with Loblaw.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with what the head of the United Nations calls a moment of peril for the world. The U.S. Secretary of State says he believes Russia will invade Ukraine before the night is over. Ukraine has declared a state of emergency. The head of the military signed a conscription order calling up reservists between the ages of 18 and 60. And late tonight, Ukraine's president addressed the nation. He says he tried to call Vladimir Putin today and all he got was silence. Then, in Russian, he appealed directly to the Russian people to stop Putin before it's too late.
А дальше по-русски. Сегодня я инициировал телефонный разговор.
Volodymyr Zelensky said war will take guarantees away from everyone. Nobody will have security guarantees anymore, he said. Who will suffer most of all? People. Who doesn't want that to happen more than anyone? People. Who can stop that? People. It was an impassioned bid to save his country. The Kremlin says the leaders of two breakaway areas in Ukraine have requested protection from Ukrainian forces, and there are fears a war on the edge of Europe is imminent. Jackson Proskow begins our coverage tonight.
Russia's relentless buildup has reached a critical stage. The U.S. believes 80% of troops are in forward position. Aircraft and ships are at the ready. All signs of an imminent, full-scale attack.
We believe that they are now at a state of readiness where they could attack at any time.
Overnight, smoke rose from the Russian embassy in Kyiv as diplomats were ordered out of the country. More weapons and ammunition from Canada and European allies arrived, and Ukraine declared a state of emergency, activating its military reserves and calling up volunteers. I'm not that young anymore, but I will join them if needed, said this 66-year-old librarian. Ukraine's president said his next steps would be decided by Russia's next move. Soon after, Ukrainian government websites faced yet another cyber attack. I have a bad feeling, says this resident of Luhansk. I feel the burden in my soul. In the regions held by Russia-backed separatists, there are preparations to seize control of more territory. Men are being conscripted to fight against Ukraine.
This is President Putin's war of choice. If he chooses to escalate further, Russia and Russia alone will bear full responsibility for what is to come.
At the UN, more condemnation of Russia was mixed with warnings that war will bring a massive refugee crisis to Europe.
If the conflict in Ukraine expands, the world could see a scale and severity of need unseen for many years.
Yet there appear to be few options left to deter Moscow. Sanctions haven't brought Russia back from the brink. What happens next is up to Putin. Tonight, the Kremlin claims that rebel leaders in Luhansk and Donetsk have requested Russian military assistance to repel what they claim is Ukrainian military aggression. Donna, this is one of those potential pretexts for an invasion, the type of thing the Pentagon says signals that potential Russian action could be hours, not days away.
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. The prospect of war in Eastern Europe could unleash a humanitarian crisis with a flood of refugees from Ukraine. As neighboring countries prepare for that, hundreds of Canadians have chosen to stay in Ukraine despite repeated calls for them to leave. Mike Armstrong reports on their family and friends who are anxiously watching events unfold.
How much time are you spending online?
A lot.
Between following the news and keeping in touch with loved ones, Anna Pluhater barely puts down her phone. She and her husband moved to Canada nearly 20 years ago and left behind hundreds of friends and family members in Ukraine.
It's heart-wrenching. It's to see what's going on and feel kind of powerless that I cannot do anything. I cannot just, bring them into safety.
Pluhatel says her loved ones in Ukraine seem to almost pretend nothing's going on. They're scared and worried, she says, but are trying to go on with their lives.
You kind of have to hang on to some kind of normality.
It is nerve-wracking.
Pluhatel's husband is worrying about his parents. They live in eastern Ukraine, about 50 kilometers from the front line. He's asked them to leave.
They're listening, they're getting ready, they're prepared to move if needs be, but I think they're in a state of denial that such thing can potentially happen this time around.
Across Canada, the Ukrainian community is nervous. There are rallies and protests planned in several cities. More than 1 million Canadians have Ukrainian heritage.
Regardless of when your family came to Canada, there's a very strong relationship and link to Ukraine. It's almost surreal.
What that's meant is people like this New Brunswick travel agent worry about their loved ones every waking hour. That after 2 years worrying about how they're doing in the pandemic.
It's not enough of COVID right now because of craziness of president. There is war, aggression, and it's sad.
Now, not knowing what Putin's end goal might be means there's no way to predict what happens next. The message people send to their friends and family members tends to be a simple but heartfelt. We are thinking of you. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Ottawa.
We got a glimpse of Vladimir Putin's mindset on Monday in that long address he gave to the nation. His narrative moved well beyond recognition of the independence of two states within Ukraine. And there was a telling moment during his meeting with Russia's Security Council. Watch how Putin treats his own head of foreign intelligence.
В противном случае вы предлагаете начать переговорный процесс?
Нет, я...
Или признавать суверенитет их. Говорите прямо.
Я поддержу предложение о признании...
Поддержу или поддерживаю? Говорите прямо, Сергей.
Поддерживаю предложение...
Так и скажите, да или нет.
Да. Поддерживаю предложение о вхождении Донецкой и Луганской народных республик в состав Российской Федерации.
Да, мы об этом не говорим, мы этого не обсуждаем. Мы говорим о признании их независимости или нет.
Да, я поддерживаю предложение о признании независимости.
Хорошо, пожалуйста, садитесь. Спасибо. Владимир Александрович.
After that, Putin delivered his speech announcing Russia was recognizing Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states and said he was sending in troops. Eric Sorensen looks at what Putin's endgame might be.
Russia's war of persuasion starts at home. Fireworks. And Russian flags in the region now recognized as not Ukraine. The pro-Russian accounts on state television, and justification from President Putin himself that Ukraine isn't a real country. Modern Ukraine was entirely created by Russia, says Putin, an integral part of our history. Historical ties go back centuries, cultural, economic, religious, political. Putin's version allows Ukraine's national boundaries to be erased, rationalized in part by the Russian ethnicity of many people in Ukraine.
He doesn't see Ukraine as being a separate nation from Russia.
Ethnically, Ukraine is 78% Ukrainian and just 17% Russian. But in Donetsk and Luhansk, deemed independent by Moscow, the Russian ethnic makeup is almost 40%, and Crimea, already taken by Russia, close to 60%.
That's one of his arguments, that the eastern part of Ukraine has more Russian speakers.
Then what does it mean for countries like Latvia? 26% of the population has Russian ethnicity, more than Ukraine. And Estonia, 25% are Russian by background. But those countries have membership in NATO, a protection that Ukraine does not have.
There is a difference, of course, of being NATO member and not being NATO member, as Ukraine shows.
Ukraine is surrounded by Russian might. And while Putin's vision may sell to many Russians, to most of the world, Ukrainians are not Russians. This is our land, said President Zelensky. We will not give anything to anybody.
It seems extremely costly to invade Ukraine in a major way.
Lisa Sundstrom thinks Putin is likely to destabilize the Ukrainian government rather than overthrow it. But Putin's rhetoric suggests Russia's historical destiny is at stake.
Putin is trying to reestablish, as much as is feasible for Russia, control over areas of former Soviet territory.
However Putin views Russia's historic entitlement, a broader invasion of Ukraine would spark a terrible conflict, and it's not clear even patriotic Russians want that. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Now to a big development here in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he is ending the use of the Federal Emergencies Act, which was invoked 9 days ago.
We were very clear that the use of the Emergencies Act would be limited in time. When we invoked it, it would be in place for up to 30 days, but we said that we would lift it as soon as possible.
Mercedes Stephenson was listening to the Prime Minister. Mercedes, what reasons did he give to end the use of the Emergencies Act?
Well, Donna, in short, he says there is no more emergency. Downtown Ottawa, as you've seen in our reporting, is no longer blockaded. Windsor, Coutts, other border crossings across Canada no longer blockaded, and no signs of convoys immediately heading there. And given the incredible gravity and power involved in the Emergencies Act, the Prime Minister said that he wanted to lift it as soon as possible. He says he's received daily briefings that have assured him by intelligence and police authorities that the laws on the books and police powers are now enough to deal with any ongoing threats. And by the way, he did say he thinks there are some ongoing threats, but that is unlikely to manifest in the way it did in previous days. Just before we went on the air, we received a press release from the Conservatives. They're criticizing the Prime Minister, saying nothing has changed since Monday when Parliament passed the Emergencies Act as a confidence vote. The Prime Minister says he had to be sure that that threat was gone before he moved on it. Now the question is what comes next? And a lot of that will be a review of the powers and how we got to this point. The Prime Minister announced today that there will both be a joint committee of parliamentarians that will scrutinize the government's decision to bring in the Emergencies Act and whether or not that was necessary, and a separate inquiry into how we got to the point that we're at now, how police reacted, and foreign disinformation and funding that may have been involved. Here's what the PM said about that.
Whether it's the Committee of Parliamentarians or the inquiry or the court cases that are already underway challenging the use of the Emergencies Act, I don't think anyone feels that there was a low bar or that this won't be fully scrutinized and reflected on.
Donna, one thing that stood out to me today, the Prime Minister's tone, much more conciliatory to people of all views than some of his past statements.
Okay, Mercedes, thanks. Ontario's Premier has also lifted the provincial state of emergency declared February 11th. Some protesters are regrouping on private properties outside Ottawa.
This is private property.
Yes,
you need to leave.
Yes, I'm leaving.
People in this field just west of Ottawa refuse to take any questions about what they're doing there or where they're headed. Dozens of trucks and trailers have assembled there since last weekend's police operation in downtown Ottawa. And Ontario police are also monitoring an encampment east of the city. Canada's largest public school board is investigating several reports of anti-Semitism at a Toronto middle school.
One of our teachers, a French teacher, a Jewish teacher, walked out of the room. When she came back into the room, several students surrounded her and gave her the Heil Hitler salute. This particular incident was very hateful, very hurtful, very upsetting to the teacher.
This isn't the first anti-Semitic incident at the school. Earlier this month, anti-Semitic graffiti was found in the boys' change room. The school says the students involved will face consequences, and it promises to ramp up teaching about anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. The protest convoy and cryptocurrency. Coming up, one group on a mission to track the digital money trail. U.S. President Joe Biden is reportedly set to issue an executive order on cryptocurrency, and it's expected to include efforts to regulate the sector. Canadians have also tried to wrestle with how to track digital currencies used for nefarious or disruptive purposes. And Gaviola looks at one group of Ottawa residents going after the money trail.
Disruptive, harassing behavior from some members of the self-proclaimed Freedom Convoy forced the shutdown of 4 Happy Goat Cafe locations in Ottawa during what should have been a much-needed opportunity to boost business.
The frustration, the intimidation, was just building.
Assad and a group of private citizens did something that's never been done before in Canada. They won a court order to freeze crypto assets of convoy organizers. The lawsuit includes the 21-year-old Ottawa resident who won an injunction banning incessant, deafening horn honking earlier this month.
The unprecedented Mareva injunction takes aim at 9 digital asset platforms to freeze and disclose information about funds sent to convoy protesters, shattering the myth that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies like it aren't trackable.
A common argument was Bitcoin is just for terrorists because it's easily obfuscated and they can hide behind the scenes.
But each and every Bitcoin transaction is recorded on a blockchain, a digital ledger that provides a time-stamped record. Information including accounts and digital wallets are there for anyone with the right tools to see. Identities can be hidden behind one or several wallets, but the digital tracks are there, and authorities can catch up to users when they exchange crypto into Canadian dollars or other fiat currency. Crypto exchange BitBuy is named in the court order and says it's ready to comply, though its anti-money laundering executive says there's something much more pervasive and much more difficult to track.
If we want to talk about evil tools, cash. Cash is the most anonymous thing in the world.
Regardless of how it's done, it's imperative to get at the cash flow lifeblood of the movement, which has seen millions in pledges, including from extremist political factions around the world.
You cut off the money, you cut off the ability of the protest to sustain itself.
Failing to do so means the anti-vax convoy can regroup again and again. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, the risk of getting reinfected with Omicron. Canada's top doctor says the country is through the worst of the Omicron wave. More Canadians have been infected with the highly contagious variant than any other version of the virus. Don't assume that means you're immune from being reinfected. Jamie Morocker explains.
Rachel McIntosh spent the days leading up to Christmas isolating with her brother after catching COVID for the second time.
It wasn't nearly as bad as the first few days, the first time around.
The 31-year-old likely first contracted the Delta variant in late April, and in December, Omicron.
Some of the numbers that we've seen suggest that if you're infected with SARS-CoV-2, you have about 3 months where you're really resistant to reinfection.
In Canada, under-testing has made it almost impossible to track our reinfection rates, but testing is widely available in Denmark. Between November 21st and February 11th, 1.8 million Danes, 32% of their population, tested positive for COVID. A study under peer review from State and Serum Institute noted more than 1,700 were reinfections. Researchers also found in rare cases some caught Omicron twice. In a sample size of over 100,000, there were 47 instances where someone tested positive for both the original strain of Omicron, BA1, and the now dominant in Denmark, BA2.
Even when we saw reinfections, it was mainly unvaccinated young people. So that kind of reassure you that if you are vaccinated, then you have quite a good protection against this phenomenon.
This bodes well for us, with 84% of eligible Canadians fully vaccinated.
The risk of reinfection, at least over the short term, few months ahead, is very, very small.
But that doesn't mean we aren't susceptible to another mutation. Rachel says she's done her part to avoid a third bout.
I had 3 vaccines, so I even had the booster shot.
Prepared as best she can, should we see another wave. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Crispy conflict next, why things are getting chippy between Frito-Lay and Loblaw. A salty situation is playing out between Canadian grocery giant Loblaw and the snack maker Frito-Lay. It has stopped shipping its products to the Loblaw grocery chain, and industry insiders say there are more than a few snacks at stake. Heather Yurex-West explains.
Have you tried these new chips?
They're perhaps a guilty pleasure, but as far as snack foods go, who doesn't love a crunchy bag of greasy chips?
What's your favorite kind of potato chip?
Ketchup.
Sour cream and onion.
Barbecue or smoky bacon.
But it's those chips that are at the center of a battle royale between two Canadian food industry giants. In one corner, food processing heavyweight PepsiCo, the parent company of potato chip manufacturer Frito-Lay. In the other, Loblaw, the country's largest grocer.
It's a massive organization not selling to a massive organization. So this is probably a first, I would say, in the country.
It means shoppers will no longer be able to buy Frito-Lay's brand products at any of the 2,400 Loblaw-owned retail stores across the country. Not at Superstore, No Frills, or Shoppers Drug Mart. Why? It's all about price.
I think that this whole situation is an indication of how challenging it's been for everyone in the supply chain over the last 2 years. There's been an enormous amount of pressure on the cost of goods.
Citing the rising cost of ingredients, packaging, and transportation, a spokesperson for PepsiCo Frito-Lay said their prices had to be adjusted. When Loblaw said no, the manufacturer stopped shipping its chips.
It's not really going to affect me much.
I'm not addicted to Lay's, so if it's not there, then I will get what I want. But I do shop different places, not only Superstore.
Except, says this industry analyst, this dispute is about more than just any one snack. Rising costs have been fueling tension between retailers and companies supplying the goods.
I actually do think that PepsiCo is out there representing more than just PepsiCo. This is about the processing industry in Canada.
And who, at the end of the day, should pay. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with the Peace Tower Carillon on Parliament Hill. Its 53 bells were played one last time this afternoon before the tower goes silent for renovations. The carillon is 95 years old and needs some upkeep. Carillonner Andrea McCready will now shift her focus to teaching, promoting carillon studies, and adapting music for the instrument. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.